Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome again to Science Shorts with Mr. Perkins. I'm Mr. Perkins. I'm a former biology teacher. I've worked with the Audubon Society, with the National Park Service, and now I'm here both running for state senate in Minnesota and also attempting to provide a little bit of relief for parents and teachers by doing some little 10-minute science videos. So let's jump into what we're doing today. Somewhere we're going to jump in. There we go. We start with our birthdays. It is April 6th, and on April 6th in 1973, we launched the satellite Pioneer 11. It was the second satellite to ever reach Jupiter. This is a picture that it took of Jupiter here on the screen. It was also the first satellite ever to reach Saturn, and it is, to this day, one of only 5 objects that is currently on a trajectory to leave the solar system. We haven't actually gotten any meaningful broadcast from it since 1995, but we still know roughly where it is. And happy birthday to Pioneer 11. As a quick aside, if you want to go back and watch something that we've done before, or if you want to rewatch something because you missed it, there is a folder on our YouTube channel that has all of these science shorts. That link will be in the description of this video as well. If you want to go rewatch a past one or if you missed one, those will all be there, again, with also links to these presentations. So just a quick bookkeeping note there. Today we are talking about viruses. COVID-19 is obviously on everybody's mind, so I wanted to take a moment. Last week we talked about how effective soap was at killing certain types of viruses. Today, I realized we should back up and look at viruses themselves. As a side note, COVID itself, the word COVID, what that means, it's broken down into 3 parts. The CO is because it is in the corona family. The VI means it is a virus, and the D stands for disease. So what COVID, and the 19 is the year it was discovered. So what COVID-19 means, what you're saying is coronavirus disease discovered in 2019. But we're going to talk about viruses broadly. What are they, and how do they make us sick? So that's our goal for today, is talk about that. So what is a virus? It is a gigantic family. The things that can be said that all of them have in common, though, they're all submicroscopic, which means that even if you have a microscope, you cannot see them. That's how small viruses are. They can only replicate in the cells of living things. They cannot reproduce on their own. They need the cells of somebody else in order to make more viruses. And if you ever want to get a biology teacher off on a rant, ask them whether or not viruses are alive. It is a hotly contested debate in the world of biology and the world of science. We're not necessarily going to go into the details of that now, but I just want everyone to know that it is debatable whether or not viruses are alive, dead, or just inactive, and what that kind of means. But again, other than that, viruses, again, are this hugely broad category of things. And I've got some of the examples down here. We've got helical viruses, we've got polyhedral viruses, we have spherical viruses, and then these alien lunar landing looking things that we often associate with viruses, we call them complex viruses. So these are, we name them based upon their shapes, but even here, if we look at this helical virus, it's the tobacco mosaic virus, named because it infects the tobacco plant. There are viruses that infect plant cells. We don't often think of plants getting sick like people or animals do, but they absolutely can. And the tobacco mosaic virus is something that infects the tobacco plant. This polyhedral virus, this adenovirus, that's a family of viruses. It includes things like pink eye. Spherical viruses, that includes influenza. It also includes the corona family, that includes COVID. And then these complex viruses are actually bacteriophages. They make bacteria sick. That's how broad a family viruses are. They not only make people and animals sick, there are viruses that make plants sick, there are viruses that make mushrooms sick, and there are viruses that make bacteria sick. So virus is this huge broad category, but let's dig into what a virus is a little more. So here's effectively, this is the anatomy of COVID, and these terms that I'm going to use here apply to all the different other types of viruses, but this is an easy model to look at. On the outside, these pink and purple proteins. These are glycoproteins. These are incredibly important. We're going to talk about them in a second, for how the virus gets into the cell that is infecting. That's how those glycoproteins are used. And these glycoproteins differ massively from virus to virus. If you're infecting a plant versus if you're infecting an animal, or even if you're, depending on what type of tissue you are infecting. If you're trying to infect, we think of influenza that infects our lungs and our respiratory system versus a very, very old virus like rabies, which infects neurological tissue, those glycoproteins are going to be different depending on the type of host that the virus has. But those proteins are always on the outside of the virus. This envelope, we talked in our SOAP talk a little bit about envelope versus non-enveloped viruses. So some have an envelope, some don't. But all of them have glycoproteins. All of them have this capsid. The capsid is what actually contains the DNA or the RNA, depending on the virus. And then inside we have the DNA or the RNA. Everything uses that DNA or RNA as its blueprint. We have DNA in our cells. My dog has DNA in its cell. If you might have just started your garden this week. Your tomato plants have DNA in their cells. Bacteria have DNA or RNA in their cells, and viruses have that as well. Normally when we think of a bacteria cell or an animal cell, we think of all the other stuff that's inside. Chloroplasts or mitochondria, and that's all missing here. So viruses are an incredibly simple thing because they don't have to do anything to maintain themselves. They just have to infect other cells and use those other cells to do their work for them. So viruses are very simple. This is all that makes them up. None of the other cellular material is really in there. So those glycoproteins, they are incredibly important, and it's how the virus gets into your cell. So here, when we look at eukaryotic viruses that infect eukaryotic things, so that'd be us. People are eukaryotes versus a prokaryotic virus. But if that infects prokaryotic cells, would be like bacteria. But effectively, they work the same way. The glycoprotein sits on the outer cell membrane and tricks the cell into thinking that it is supposed to be there. Because cells have a lot of reasons to take in something from the outside world, whether that's oxygen, water, protein, hormones, any number of things need to pass through that cell membrane. That's very important. And cells have kind of a secret handshake to make certain that only things that they want to get inside the cell can. And those glycoproteins on the outside of the cell, on the outside of the virus, trick the cell into thinking the virus knows the secret handshake. And so the cell says, yeah, virus, come on in. You're supposed to be here. That's good. And then the virus, once it's inside the cell, sheds the outer envelope, sheds the protein, and the capsid and DNA escape into the cell in both cases. That's all what you really need to know. The virus lands on the cell, the proteins attach it to the cell and trick the cell into letting the virus in. And then once the virus is inside, it takes over the cell's machinery. So your cells are doing hundreds of different tasks in your body. Your skin cells are making proteins and protecting you. And additionally, they're making more cells. And so the virus, once it's inside and has entered the cell, it uses your own cell's factory to instead make more viruses. It's a complete hostile takeover of the cell. The cell is still alive at this stage, but it's no longer doing what it should be doing inside the body. You can kind of think of it like a zombie cell. It's there, it's not dead, but it's not working the way it's supposed to. It's only making viruses. And then as the viruses pile up inside the cell, eventually there are so many viruses in there that the cell bursts. This is called lysis. And now all of these viruses are free to roam the body and infect other cells in the same organism. So that's the process. These viruses go and land on another cell, trick the cell into letting it in. The virus